everybody. Welcome to Something to Bark About, the podcast where we're going to talk about dogs, dog training, and whatever else strikes my fancy. My name is Chad Mackin, and I will be your host and your guide on this journey into the world of dogs. Hey, everybody. Welcome back. I didn't actually plan to record today. I was doing my own thing, working, trying to think about what I wanted to do my next topic on, my next podcast on, and I had a couple ideas. But I was working with a dog today, and something just hit me, man, and it became something that was really kind of this burning desire to get out. And it started a couple weeks ago. And I saw a post on Facebook, and there's a dog trainer who released a video from a workshop, and it was a controversial video. It was a controversial technique that he used, and I'm not going to get into it. Those of you who follow the dog training world will know who I'm talking about. Those of you who don't need to know, because it doesn't really matter. But the point is I don't agree with this trainer on a lot of things, especially not with the way he approaches the use of compulsion and punishment and this sort of thing. And this was a video where he was using a fairly, he was using a controversial form of punishment. And again, I won't get into a lot of details about that because I don't want to sort of make this about him. But anyway, so somebody on one of the forums I belong to posted this thing, go, hey, the purely positive crowd is going after this guy, and we have to sort of, as balanced trainers, we have to sort of stand up to them and defend them, because if they're going to go after this guy, they're going to go after all of us. And this really hit a nerve with me a little bit. So I want to take you guys back many years ago. There was a trainer, and again, I won't say her name, but she was in a pretty big case where she was charged with animal cruelty. Now, bear in mind as I tell you this story, I'm not going to speak to the veracity of these claims because I have no ability to. I don't know if she did what she was accused of. Right? I have no idea. None. So, but I will tell you that the things she was accused of were pretty frightening. So one of the stories that came out about this woman, and this was like national news. Not like on the television news, but like websites that are, like CBS.com or whatever, right? Would have, articles about this, and PETA was involved, and a lot of animal rights groups were involved. But one of the stories they told about this woman was, well, first of all, there were a lot of people who said that she would go to a park and she would train dogs with e-collars, and people in the parks could hear dogs, screaming and hollering and making a lot of noise. And said the police got, apparently, according to the reports, got several complaints about her from average citizens about dogs just being in distress and, freaking out and making a lot of noise and this sort of thing. Like not one, not two, but a pretty regular, consistent complaint, right? And but the one story that really, if it was true, we'll talk about if it was true in a minute. But one story that really was, sort of important in my mind was this story that a dog that she had been training with an e-collar in a park ran off, and she couldn't find it. And so she went walking the neighborhood, hitting the remote, calling the dog, hitting the remote, calling the dog, hitting the remote, calling the dog, like real high up. What she didn't know was that a family had found the dog running the streets and picked it up and taken it home to try and find its owner. And when she got within range, when she walked within range of that dog, they're minding their own business with the dog in the house, trying to figure out how to find its owner or whatever. All of a sudden, the dog starts screaming and tearing around the house and whatever. And they finally discovered the dog's wearing an e-collar. This woman had been just shocking the hell out of this dog on the e-collar blindly, not knowing if the dog was in any position to comply, which he wasn't, not knowing if the dog had any understanding of how to comply, which he may or may not have, I don't know. But this was the story. This was what was reported in the news. Now, if those allegations are true, that's garbage. That's shit training. That's not training. That's cruel. That's wrong. That's not helpful. That's bad. Like we should never, ever, ever as an industry say, hey, we're behind this. We think this is okay. This is perfectly acceptable. This is what we think good dog training looks like. We should never defend that. Ever. And yet there was at the time an effort amongst balanced trainers to contribute to her legal war chest. The hue and cry at the time was, oh my God, the purely positive are coming to take our tools. The animal rights people are coming to take our tools, and we can't let them get a single foothold. And people were spending money. People were giving their money into her legal defense fund. It was crazy, and she ended up beating the charge. She was never convicted. But she also lost her IACP membership, not directly because of that. But she was no longer a member of the IACP, largely because she refused to respond to questions from the organization. All right, but the point is that as I'm watching this guy say, it's the same thing now. Maybe the example is not as extreme, and I'm not going to pretend it is, but the idea, the fear tactic is the same, is that if we don't stand up for this trainer, whether we agree with them or not, whether we think they're a good trainer or not, whether we agree with what we see in that video or not, we should stand up for them, because if we don't, they're going to come after our tools. They're going to come after our ability. They're going to come after our ability to do our work and earn a living the way we want to. It is the appeal to fear. Like, we have to be afraid of this. The enemy is at the gates, and we have to all band together. And this got me thinking. I don't mean to criticize the people who say that. I don't mean to criticize the people who defend that idea. I don't mean to criticize people who are worried about what will happen if the animal rights activists succeed in taking our tools. I do understand, and I do agree that there are those out there hostile to what good trainers do. There are people out there that are hostile towards anybody who's willing to use any kind of physical correction whatsoever. And there are people who would love to see that outlawed. But I want to say a few things about that. And the first thing is, those people are few and far between. They aren't the loudest voices. And maybe they are the loudest voices, but they're not the most influential voices. I don't believe that that's the risk. I believe the risk comes when reasonable people see training that does not look reasonable. They see reactions from the dog that do not seem to be in line with the offense that the dog gave. They see corrections that seem to be more intense than the dog deserves, or emotionally more disturbing to the dog than they should be. They see a dog in distress. They see a dog who is clearly frightened and fearful, and they say, that doesn't look like good training to me. That shouldn't be a normal thing. And when we go, oh, yes, it is normal, or we say, hey, listen, we should be able to do whatever we want to do. If they see that, they go, no, you shouldn't do that. Then we lose our credibility. Especially if we do it all the time. Now, don't get me wrong. Like, there might someday surface a video may surface someday with somebody doing something to a dog that I'm like, you know what? I know that looks bad, but it actually makes sense, and here's why. Right? If that comes out, I would definitely say that. But if we're doing that all the time and we never say, hey, listen, that jerk over there, that's not how I like to train. I don't believe in that. I don't think that's good training. That woman shocking a dog that she can not see or observe, just boosting the level to maximum power and just holding the button down as she walks through the neighborhood, that woman is not on my team. But when we go, if we do that, then we have some credibility when we say, listen, I will call out a bad trainer when I see it. I don't think this is bad training. Here's why. But if we defend the indefensible, if we stand up for those who do things that make us feel bad inside, that make us go, I don't want that look to be the look of dog training. If we stand up for those people, we lose credibility. So the problem is we have been forced into this situation, right? Because some people somewhere along the line have drawn a line in the sand, and that line is you either use physical corrections or you do not use physical corrections. If you use physical corrections, you are a bad person If you don't use physical corrections, you are a good person. Somebody made that decision. And I'm using the word physical corrections deliberately because I don't mean punishment, because everybody will use negative punishment. Everybody will take away resources, take away opportunities. Everybody will put a dog away or something, use some sort of withholding in order to motivate a dog. There's nobody who doesn't do that. Okay. And for most people, even on the quote unquote purely positive side of the fence, they will use a no reward marker or some sort of signal that the dog has made a mistake. So while there are people who are going to say that even that is like a no reward marker, or saying no to a dog is wrong and bad and we shouldn't do it, for the most part, those are just the extreme elements within the positive training community. For the most part, everybody's going to use some form of consequence for mistakes, but they don't call it punishment, even though it's negative punishment. When they withhold something or remove something, even though that's negative punishment, they don't mean that when they say they don't use punishment. What they mean is physical corrections. They don't use physical corrections because they also don't use negative reinforcement. And like, don't get hung up on, if you're not a dog trainer and not familiar with this terminology, don't get hung up on it. That's really for the dog trainers. But I mean physical correction. When they say punishment, they usually mean physical corrections. Any form of physical pressure to compel a dog to obey or to change their behavior. And so this line is, I don't want to say it's arbitrary, but it is in a way, right? So as I look at this question of this situation where we're in, where we're being asked to perform, to distinguish ourselves based on this idea, based on this criteria, it puts us in a bad position. And I can remember a conversation I had with Jay Jack at some point in time, and maybe it was on one of the Dog Training Conversations podcasts, or maybe it was a personal conversation or another podcast he was on. But the subject of a race war came up, and he said, one of the things he said was that one of the biggest scary parts or biggest negative aspects of a race war is that you can't put on a uniform in a race war, right? You can't say, hey, I'm not with those guys. Like your skin is the color it is. And by the nature of that race war, it forces you to have allies that you didn't choose and enemies that you didn't choose. And I kind of feel like when whoever made the distinction between, oh, you either use physical corrections or you don't, that puts us in a similar position where we either have allies, where we often have allies that we didn't choose, and unfortunately we also have enemies that we didn't choose, right? So there are trainers who use physical corrections that I want nothing to do with. I don't want my name mentioned in the same sentence with them. I don't think what they do is useful, helpful, valuable. I don't think it's good for dogs. I don't think it's good for the industry. When you're walking around the street, if assuming it's true, if you're walking down the street juicing dogs at maximum level that you can't see and you can't observe because you lost the client's dog and you don't know what else to do, I don't want my name mentioned in the same sentence with you. I don't want my name to be equated with yours. I don't want what you do to be equated with what I do. I don't want people to think that you and I are on the same side. Likewise, there are trainers who move away, who avoid using physical corrections, that I have a great deal of respect for and would much rather be associated with. And when we start to make this distinction about just that simple question, do you use physical compulsion or not? If we make the question about that, that hurts everybody, because it puts me in the wrong category. And it puts them in the wrong category, because I have a lot more in common. I've said this before. I have a lot more in common with some of those people on the more moderate end of the positive spectrum than I do with people on the more extreme end of the quote unquote balanced spectrum. Like, you're going to see a lot more similarities between my training and their training than you will between my training and some of these people that are, currently stirring all this controversy. And so I think we need to really, as an industry, work on how we frame this question. Like, the question should not be whether or not we use physical compulsion or not. The question should be about how, when, and why we use it. What does it look like? How does it work? What do we do to ensure the dog doesn't get overcorrected? What do we do to ensure that there's that the risks and potential drawbacks of physical corrections are minimized? How do we protect the dog's safety both physically, mentally, and psychologically? How do we ensure that we're fair? How do we ensure that we're doing the right thing for the dog? Right? And this is the real question. This is the real point, because people who are good at physical correction, they don't take it lightly. It's not a cavalier action. It is serious. It is thoughtful. It is deliberate. It is not, I lost my temper. It is not, I got frustrated. It is not, I don't know what else to do, so I'm going to do this. It should be a deliberate choice that's made for good reasons. Right? And I will tell you, so for a long time, for many years, I worked very hard to minimize the amount of physical correction that I used on dogs. I worked very hard to find other ways to do things. I've never been a positive only trainer. I've never said you should never use physical correction. I've never even actually insisted that other trainers be as soft as I have tried to be. In my own head, I was purposefully trying to make myself the best trainer I could be at motivating a dog, so I wouldn't have to use compulsion or force any more often than I needed to. I wanted dogs who wanted to work. I wanted to get the dog's will aligned with my own, and I made for years I made this my primary goal. And now I've reached a point where I feel pretty confident about my ability to motivate dogs. I feel like I've reached a level of competence where now I'm ready I'm more comfortable bringing back in a little correction here or a correction there. My concern up until this point has been that I was taking a shortcut, that I couldn't find the way to do it in a more motivational way. So I'm just falling back on the easy solution of I'm just going to give this dog a correction and move on. And I don't feel that anymore. I feel like now I can very deliberately and very intelligently know when using a little bit of correction is the fastest route to success and the fairest route for the dog. So I'll give you an example. I was working with a dog today in a private lesson, and it's the first time we've done the down command. Introduced the down command today to this dog. And the lesson was about 45 minutes all told. And so we worked on some stuff that we'd done the week before. We worked on some focus work, some attention work. We cleaned up some issues with heel, worked on keeping the dog tight with us, and a bunch of other stuff. And we introduced the down command. Right. And so I don't know how much of time I spent with this, because there were several, we do one thing for a little bit, move on to something else, and come back to it, give the dog a break. A very fluid training session where we worked on a lot of different things rather than hammering one thing over and over and over again. But in this 40-minute session, which maybe 20 minutes of it was down, I really don't know. But we went from introducing the command cold to having a dog that I could stay down. She would hit the ground pretty quickly. Like within 2 seconds of me saying down, and I could walk away from her to about 15 feet, and even if I waved a treat in front of her, you could see her get more committed to the down. Right? It was really quick progress, and it was really solid. I mean, there's still a lot of work to go. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say the command is finished, but she was highly motivated and highly committed to the behavior. And there were three times I applied leash pressure to correct her, like in a manner that was more assertive than merely guiding. Right? Nothing that I think someone would say, "Oh, you're using pain to motivate." But I did use the leash to register that I was not happy with the choice she made. Right? So it was a little supplement to my little There's a little bit more oomph to that, saying, "Hey, you got to do this." It was like 3 times, like once for, kind of, half downing, and a couple times when I started to walk away from her when she would try to follow me. Now, let me be very clear. All of these things I tried to work other ways. Like there was a time where I would have kept resetting her. I'd walk away, she'd get up, go, take her back, put her down. I'd get up, I'd walk away, go, take her back, put her down. And that would have worked. I know it would have worked because I used it for years. Like, it would have taken, but it wouldn't have happened probably in this session. It would have taken, several times before I could count on her. But like I said, 2 short corrections over that, and she got it. Right? Now, here's the thing about this when I say this. Now, there are some dogs who I really believe there's some dogs that when you add an element of correction, it makes the game more interesting to them. Like a gambler who finds a sporting event more exciting if he's got some money on the line. Some skin in the game, it creates a bigger motivation, bigger interest. There are certain dogs who are that way. I think a lot of your working line Malinois are going to be that way. A lot of your working line Shepherds, a lot of dogs who are into sport work or conflict-based training, they're going to like that. They're going to get off on that because that's what they do. They want conflict. They get off on conflict. But most dogs who aren't bred to enjoy conflict, especially dogs who are socially sensitive, that's not they're not going to be that dog, right? And this is important. Sometimes when we talk about punishment or physical corrections, the term fallout gets used a lot. We hear this all the time, there's always fallout when you use punishment. And while I would not say always, I think it is a real problem, and I think it's largely ignored or missed. And so the reason why this happens, I think, the more you are into motivating dogs, the more you practice motivation, the more sensitive you are to variations and fluctuations in motivation, right? And the better I got at motivating the dog, the more I saw the quote-unquote fallout from punishment, the more I could recognize it. It's not that it wasn't there before. It's that I didn't know what a motivated dog looked like. I didn't understand what I was trying to achieve, or I shouldn't say that. I wasn't trying to achieve a dog who was motivated. I was just trying to get a compliant dog. And when you start looking for the motivated dog, when you start looking for signs that the dog is interested or not interested, when you start adjusting your training schedule or your training program or your training session based on your dog's motivation level and trying to keep them guessing and trying to keep the game interesting and trying to keep them, on point, when you go, oh, my dog's starting to lose motivation, I want to switch to something else. When you get to that point where you go, I'm not going to do another rep because if I do it, it's going to be worse. Like when you start trying to end the practice at the dog's best rep and not let them flag down, not let them hit this, do that less than perfect rep or that less enthusiastic rep. But when you start trying to do that, you start to become very, very, very sensitive to their motivation levels. And you can see how a little bit of physical correction will cause that motivation to flag. So when you have trainers who say, I've never seen a dog have fallout from punishment, there's a real good chance that they're not really focusing on motivation. And of course, they don't have to focus on motivation. That's not my point. But when you focus on motivation, when you pay attention to that, you will notice the fallout from almost every correction you give a dog. Even if it makes things more clear, especially dogs, the more socially sensitive the dog is, the more you're going to notice that, right? So one of the things that's really important is making sure if you're focused on motivation, using physical corrections has to become a very conscious choice, because when you use that, you might speed up learning, but you might slow down motivation, and you don't want that motivation to flag much. You want to keep that dog into the game and moving along the track you want them to go on, right? But frustration can also kill motivation. So if a well-timed correction makes things more clear to the dog and improves their progress and gets you to move on faster, then even though you might lose a little in motivation, in the long run, it is probably beneficial for that dog. Especially if you're really good about coming back and building that motivation back in. Clarity creates confidence, and confidence creates enthusiasm. Confusion reduces clarity and therefore reduces enthusiasm. So if you're training in a way that, if you're using corrections in a way that add clarity rather than fear, then what you lose in motivation can be built back through the enthusiasm gained through more clarity, which is exactly what happened with this dog today. I gave her a correction and she was like, oh, it wasn't terrible. Don't get me wrong. It's not like most people, like the average person watching the dog would not have noticed anything. The average person watching the dog wouldn't have noticed anything. They would say, "Oh, yeah, it looks good," but to my eyes, there was a noticeable drop in enthusiasm. But I built that up real quick because I'm real good at building enthusiasm, and so there was a net positive gain. Was there a little bit of a fallout? Yes, and you got to be aware of that. You got to deal with that and approach that. But the point is that what would have taken me 2, maybe 3 sessions to get to that level of confidence and competence took me, I don't know, maybe 20 minutes. I don't know. Because like I said, the session was a lot of different things, but it happened really fast because I knew when to apply that little bit of pressure. And don't get me wrong, guys, when I talk about these corrections, these weren't like extreme. Like this wasn't like the dog, like this is the other thing too. Like a reasonable person watching that session would not have felt like the dog was in distress. And this is what I think where part of the argument is being lost. Like when we start trying to defend dog training that is, in my opinion, indefensible, the arguments made to defend it are often an attempt to nullify the initial emotional response people see to the training. It's an attempt to minimize the emotional response the dog has. And I think that if we're going to talk about this, if we're going to talk about what's right and what's fair and what should be, allowed and not allowed, like I don't like the word abuse. I think that it is used way, way too casually. Like the video that we're talking about, the video that came out, I'm not going to accuse that trainer of abusing that dog. I don't believe the dog suffered any lasting harm. I don't believe the dog was traumatized by it, at least not in any way that was going to matter tomorrow or the next day or a week from now or whatever. But I do believe it was bad training. I do believe it was unfair to the dog. I do believe it was ham-handed and clumsy. And I do believe it could have been done. The result he was looking for could have been gotten without putting the dog through that level of distress. The average person watching that video goes, "Ugh, I don't like that. That doesn't feel good to me. Something seems wrong with that." And I think the standard of would a reasonable person be bothered by it is a pretty decent starting point when we start to evaluate training. Like you talk about e-collars and people go, "Oh my God, they're so scary. They're so terrible." Because what we're imagining is dogs being lit up. What people imagine when they think they are projecting their fear of electricity into the dog. And they're assuming that because I wouldn't like to be shocked, the dog must not like to be shocked. And of course, the argument is that if it wasn't aversive, they wouldn't avoid it, blah, 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 blah. And that's a reasonable position to take. And I don't have time probably in this episode to dig into that one. And maybe I'll do that later. I'll get a guest on and we'll talk about that. Somebody who's a little bit more proficient in e-collar. I'm pretty good with an e-collar, but there are people who are known for their e-collar work, and maybe get one of those guys in and we'll talk about that. But the point I'm getting at is when people project their fear of electricity in the dog, they have this in their head. When people start talking about banning e-collars, the average dog owner is not seeing good e-collar work in their head. The average dog owner is seeing bad e-collar work in their head. They're seeing dogs, vocalizing or shutting down, flattening out, or pissing themselves or whatever. They're seeing all of these terrible things in their head, or maybe they're imagining, hair standing on end and sparks around the dog, and the dog jumping 3 feet in the air like a Tom and Jerry cartoon. I don't know, but when the average person sees good e-collar work, they go, "Oh, that's what it is? Well, that's not a problem. I don't see what the big deal is." So I think if we use the standard of what a reasonable person would respond to in those situations, I think we're going to do a little bit better. I think that's a real good place to start, at least. Like we can talk about the big term, imagined harm. Like there's a guy who talks about this, these punishments don't really cause harm. It's imagined harm. And people are are worried about this, no harm came to this dog. And so that, okay, probably right. No physical harm came to this dog. I agree. And again, I already said, I don't think the dog had any lasting trauma. Right. But is distress harmful? Is it something we should avoid? Do we work hard to avoid it? Do we encourage, do we want our children and our dogs to experience more distress or less distress in their life? Like the whole argument for punishment made by trainers who use it, the whole argument for physical corrections by trainers who use it is that it improves the quality of the dog's life. Right? They'll say, well, a dog who is properly trained can go more places. You look at the debate in the UK going over in the e-collar and all the people out there who are trying to support that. They talk about, that with an e-collar, you can let a dog run free. If you don't have an e-collar, they're going to be, and you're running free, they're going to be, killing sheep. And so the idea that a dog wants to run and putting them on an e-collar allows them to do that much better than anything else. And allows them to protect the sheep and all of these other things. Like, all of that is built on the idea that we want dogs to have the most joy in life possible, which means we want to avoid distress. The argument is that if we use this e-collar now, we don't have to make them suffer the frustration of being on a leash their whole life. And I agree. 100% agree with that. 100%. And that's not... Let me step back and say this real quick. I am bothered by this idea, this notion that you cannot train an off-lead reliable dog without batteries. Guys, people have been training dogs reliably for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years. You don't necessarily need an e-collar. I support e-collar training. I use e-collars, and anytime someone comes and says, I want to run my dog off leash, we're going to have a conversation about e-collar, because I don't take the seatbelt out of my car just because I don't think I'm going to get in an accident. I don't take the airbag out of my car just because I don't think I'm going to get in an accident. I shouldn't be relying on either of those for my safety. I should be relying on my own ability to drive, my own perception, my own, if I got in a car and I thought, well, I'm surely going to get in a wreck today, I wouldn't get in the car. Right. So I'm not saying that we should abandon them. I'm saying they're valuable, they're useful, but we don't. I cannot stand the idea that if my seatbelt was broken and I had to go somewhere, I drive without a seatbelt. If my airbag is broken, there's a recall for it and I've not got it taken care of, and that's several years down the road. If I was really, really important, if I thought the airbag was really, really super important, if I thought I was going to need it, I wouldn't drive. Right. And so, yeah, if you are in a situation where your dog's going to be off leash and you have an e-collar, put it on the dog. You could save his life. If your dog, listen, there's no such thing as 100% reliable in this world. My iPhone is not 100% reliable. It's a computer. It's a machine that does what it's programmed to do. It doesn't have free will. It doesn't make choices. The software that I'm using right now to record this is not 100% reliable. Sometimes it glitches. Right? My car is a mechanical piece of engineering that is designed to be super dependable. And sometimes you stick the key in and you turn it, it doesn't start. Sometimes you get that little check engine 100% reliability doesn't exist in mechanical or electronic goods, so it sure as hell can't exist in a dog. It doesn't exist in people. 100% reliable does not exist in biology. It does not exist in the world. Right? So we're not talking about whether your dog is 100% reliable or not. We're talking about, is your dog reasonably reliable? Can you count on your dog? I count on my car. I count on my phone. I count on my dog. But sometimes if that car doesn't start, or that phone doesn't do the thing it's supposed to do, or my computer doesn't do what it's supposed to do, it's nice to know that I have a solution there. So I don't like the idea of the e-collar being a substitute for training. I like the idea of the e-collar being a tool for training. I like the idea of the e-collar to be a support to training. I like the idea of the e-collar not just as I don't mean just as an airbag. Right? I think it's a very valuable tool for training a dog if you do it correctly, which again is a whole other subject. And, like I said, maybe I'll do a whole episode, or maybe even a few episodes on e-collars down the line. But all I'm trying to say is that you should, if your dog gets loose and you don't have an e-collar on the dog, it should not feel like, oh my God, I don't know what I'm going to do. Is he going to listen? Can I get my dog back? You shouldn't be worried about that. Wait, but if you call that dog and he doesn't come for whatever reason, you have that ability to reach out and tap him on the shoulder, and that's why they're valuable, right? So, I forgot why I went on this e-collar rant. Oh yeah, there it is. So the reason why I went on this e-collar rant was we were talking about, yes, I agree that dogs should have more freedom, and good training gives them more freedom. And frustration is something to be avoided. In other words, the argument that people are using for e-collars in the UK and elsewhere, the argument that people are using for e-collars is that it improves the quality of the dog's life. The dog experiences less distress. We can all agree on a philosophical level that we want the dog to suffer as little distress as possible. And people always say, well, there's stress, there's eustress and distress, and eustress is good. Yes, there are good forms of stress, and even a little distress can be good, especially when it's applied judiciously and intentionally to create a more reliable response in the future. It's not always terrible, but we can all agree listen, if you think about it, at the end of your dog's life, he's going to have X number of happy moments, X number of unhappy moments. I think we can all agree, if we love dogs, that we want as many happy moments as we can have, and as few unhappy moments as we can have. Right? I think that's pretty simple. So the question is, it's like, did he die? Well, there's a lot more things that are problematic than death. Was he injured? There's a lot more things that are problematic than death. Do we want the dog's life to be better or not? So, yes, I think we should minimize distress with our dogs, and I don't think that's an unreasonable position to take, and I don't think many dog owners would disagree with that. And I think if, as dog trainers, we start to argue that distress isn't a problem, that we shouldn't worry about it, that it's no big deal, I think we're going to lose that conversation. If the reasonable person looks at your training and goes, I don't think I could do that, I don't want my dog to experience that, then what do you think they're going to do? I mean, you can talk all you want. You can say, well, they're not qualified to have a dog. They don't know what they're looking at. They're idiots. They're too soft. We can complain about how participation trophies have made the world weak and all of that other stuff, but none of that changes the world you're living in. And none of that changes that you have this opportunity to help this dog. And if you can do it with less distress, if you can improve the dog's life with less distress, if you can solve the owner's problem with less distress, if you can create a reliable dog in a way that is less problematic for the dog, then fucking A, you should do it that way. Like, I don't even understand how it's a question. I don't understand how we can stand here and we can go, yeah, it looks really bad, but it's okay. It looks really bad, but it's a little bit faster. Like, I can do this in 5 minutes, but it might have taken me a week to do it another way. In the course of a dog's life, in the course of a dog owner's life, like, I get it. Listen, don't get me wrong. Like, in an emergency, you do what you do in emergencies, right? Your dog's running out in the street. No, you're not going to throw a cookie at the dog. You're going to stop him. Your dog is trying to bite somebody in the face. You're not going to go, hey, come here, come on, baby. It's okay. It's okay. You're going to stop him, right? And that might mean some physical force. That might be necessary. That's not what I'm talking about here. There are this is the big argument. Well, this dog's in danger of being put down, man. Like, the owners are really frustrated, and like, fucking do a board and train. Get the dog out of the house. Get the dog out of the house so they don't have to worry about it. I have 26 years, almost 27 years in this game. I'm months away from my 27th anniversary since I took my first professional target. Just months away. Right? I have never had somebody tell me in all these years. If you don't fix my dog in the first session, I'm putting him down. Never. Not a single time. So this idea that we have to fix it immediately or the dog dies is nonsense. It's not true. Right? I mean, it might be on very rare occasions, but you know what? If since somebody is really frustrated with their dog, let's try to do a board and train. Happened to me very recently. I have a woman coming in for private lessons. Her dog's resource guarding. And, you know, after the first session, she went home. She texted me. She texted me like between our second and third session. Oh, the dog got a hold of something today, but I did what you told me and it worked. I got it away from him. Right? Awesome. Cool. Right? She saw hope. She saw progress. But the problem is she's afraid of her dog. And that fear doesn't go away. Even though she had the success, she's still afraid of the dog. So we talked about it. We decided to do board and train. Okay, bring the dog in for board and train. And this will give me more time to practice. So you have time to build confidence and build and get over that hump. Right? So, but it's very rare. It's very rare that somebody's going to call you with a dog and say, if you don't fix this dog in the next day or even week, we're putting him down. If you can give them hope, they will keep working. You can manage. People can manage the dog long enough to solve most of these problems. So if I can solve a problem in a week or two and you can solve it in 5 minutes, hey, that's awesome. But I do not believe that sometimes, let me phrase that. Let me step back. If you can do it without causing unnecessary distress to the dog, then show me what you're doing. I want to know. But if what you're doing is severe enough that the reasonable person goes, I don't know about that. I don't know if that's justified. Then maybe take a little bit slower approach. Maybe you're putting more pressure on that dog than is necessary to meet your idealized timetable. So let's be reasonable about this. Let's take this approach to corrections. Let's draw the distinction differently. I don't care. I don't choose the trainers I respect and admire based on their decision about whether or not they will use physical corrections or not. That doesn't even enter into it. I look at the dogs they turn out. Are they effective? Do they create reliable results? Do they create dogs who look good? Do they, like, Larry Crone says, if dog looks like shit when you're done, you did a shitty job. Right? If you produce dogs who look good, confident, and know what they're doing, I don't have to ask whether you use physical corrections or not because it's irrelevant. But if you show me a dog who looks like his entire goal is to avoid getting his ass whooped, then, I can be pretty certain that you've done things to that dog that I wouldn't want to do. And that the average person wouldn't want to do. And don't get me wrong, some dogs are just fearful. Some dogs are always going to look that way. Like for some dogs, getting them there represents a huge improvement in their quality of life. But that's not most dogs. That's a very, very small percentage of dogs. So let's stop making the distinction about whether you'll use corrections or not. This balance versus positive, it's garbage. Start talking about how, when, and why we use corrections. What sort of corrections are acceptable, which ones aren't, and when are they acceptable? When is it okay to use force, and the degree of force that you use? How do you determine that? Let's talk about that as a society, as an industry. Let's keep every time the subject comes up of whether you use punishment or not, let's be open about it. Let's be transparent. Yes, I will use physical corrections, and here's why, and here's how. Here's the physical corrections I use. If you didn't get a chance to see J-Jack's presentation, I say performance because it was incredibly entertaining. But if you didn't see J-Jack's presentation at conference, you missed out, man. And they didn't record it. It wasn't live streamed or anything like that, which is a shame. I stole this trick from him and I use it now pretty regularly, and it's really awesome. It's one of the reasons why I'm using a little bit more compulsion too, is he'll give the leash a little snap and then treat. Snap treat, snap, treat. So that leash pop, and I tell my clients, like, think of it like you're snapping a towel. Now, he was doing it with a flexi, so he was hitting the button. But since I'm not using the flexi for it most of the time, I tell people, snap the leash like a towel. Not real hard, just enough to get the dog's attention. Snap, treat, snap, treat, snap, treat. And so then if later on you have to use a little bit more pop on that leash, the dog actually starts to fire off those the dopamine from that reward. The leash snap almost becomes like a clicker, but yet you can change the dog's behavior. You can alter the dog's behavior. It's really, really cool and super, super effective. So I do that a whole lot, and that helps make the physical correction effective, yet not so stressful. And again, we want to minimize the distress, right? We can all agree that the less stressed the dog is, the better off they are. All right. So it's a really cool way to accomplish that goal. So just because learning how to use compulsion, and there's other tricks for sure. You build the dog's confidence, you make sure they understand as much of the idea is that you can teach that way or teach without that. And also, of course, deposits in the trust bank. How much does the dog trust you? How much does the dog have faith in you? So if you go, hey, it's okay, we're not mad at you, we just got to change this, they'll go, okay, I got this. Like, so there's a whole lot of things you can do to minimize the potential fallout from corrections or the stress that it causes, and that's what we want to do. But yeah, if you're going to use corrections, if you're going to use any kind of physical compulsion, you gotta mitigate it somehow. Our idea is that we want the dog to have less distress rather than more distress. But let's talk about that stuff. Let's talk about how we do these things. Let's share. Let's choose our tribe based on those questions, not on these other questions, right? These other ideas. Let's make sure that we choose our tribe based on not whether someone's willing to use punishments, but if they are, how are they doing then? And at the end of the day, based on what the sort of dogs they produce, right? Did they produce motivated dogs who, when it's time to work, are ready to work, but can also be chill, can be calm and livable? Like, you need both sides of it. You need a dog who is ready and willing to perform commands and can get excited. And you also need a dog that when you go, hey, settle down, they can go, okay, cool, we'll be calm. Right? But the drawing the distinction between, if we're going to draw the distinction simply between whether you will do it or not, we're going to have allies we don't necessarily choose or want, and we're going to have enemies that we don't necessarily choose or want. All right? So let's focus on that. Let's focus on how we fit in general to that model. Not whether or not you'll use physical corrections or not, but when, where, and how. All right. So that's all I got today. Thank you to all for listening. And